Hello everyone and welcome to lectures 11 and 12. Again, this video is going to contain the topics of two lectures, and in this lecture we're going to talk about the client-side programming. Finally, we arrived to the point of client-side programming. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to cover everything about client-side programming, but at least this lecture should be enough for you to understand what is client-side programming and like which language we use, how we use that. Okay, and in this case, it's a JavaScript, and we're going to talk about how JavaScript can be used to build simple, interactive front-end web applications. Right? So how are we going to organize the lecture? So obviously we're going to talk about JavaScript and its basics first. So we'll talk about the language itself, which is pretty simple. I mean, in the terms of syntax, okay, we're not going to concentrate on that part a lot. We'll talk about some important concepts like the document object model, event handling, input validation, and then we'll also discuss about Ajax and jQuery. Okay. So that will be basically the topic of the lecture 10, and in lecture 11, okay, which is also in the same video, okay, we'll discuss about the modern JavaScript, something that people use to develop front-end applications in their development environment. So some JavaScript that goes beyond the browser, okay, something that runs on our computer, okay, not inside a browser. Okay, and how we can go and use JavaScript tools that run outside our browser to build something useful for the front end. Okay, so we're going to discuss about Sass, we're going to discuss about TypeScript, and then some important features of the new version of JavaScript. It's called ECMAScript 6, or sometimes people refer to it as an ECMA 2015. But we'll discuss about those features and the browsers that basically support these features nowadays. Okay, so what is client-side programming? Okay, how is different from server-side programming? Okay, so in the server-side programming, as we know, okay, there is a PHP script running out there, okay, and its main job is to generate some text, right? So the user goes and asks for a particular resource on the server. The server goes and runs a PHP script. That PHP script goes and generates an HTML file, and that HTML content is then sent to the browser, okay, as inside response. So what browser does is the browser goes and renders that HTML and then shows you, okay, all the graphical components, okay, of your web page, right? So what is client-side programming then? Okay, as the name suggests, the client-side programming is something that runs on the client, okay, not on the server, but on the client. So we know that in an HTTP world, in a web, the client is a web browser, okay? So the web browser can go and run some programs, okay? And these programs nowadays are written in JavaScript. And back in the old days, people were like using two different languages like JavaScript and VBScript. Okay, but later on, the browsers kind of de facto adopted the JavaScript syntax. Okay, and nowadays, many people, okay, every browser, all the modern browsers nowadays, basically use JavaScript as a client-side scripting language. Okay, so how this client-side scripting language works. Okay, so again, we go into a request. Send a request. The web server goes and finds the particular web document. Okay, and then inside that web document, it might go and reference some client-side code. So that's just a text, and then it sends it to the browser. Well, the browser parses these HTML document. When it encounters a certain JavaScript, it goes and executes it straight away, right? So while rendering the components, it may go and encounter some script, something like that, and as soon as it goes and finds that particular script, the browser can go and execute it, and that script usually does something into our web document on the client side. So what sort of things it can do on the client side, right? So the JavaScript can be used for multiple different things. For example, we can make our web pages more usable, in the sense that, okay, we don't have to go and send requests, okay, to the server to make our pages interactive, saying like more proactive. When the user goes and does something on the page, we would like to give an immediate feedback to the user without making user wait, okay, the post back to the server. So that makes obviously websites much more usable and user friendly, so users can actually enjoy using our web page if we have a little bit of an interactivity, okay, happening on the browser side, right? So because it's immediate, it's happening on your computer. It's also efficient because you're not spending a lot of traffic for small changes, right? So you can go and make those changes locally on that computer, and it's also event driven. Okay, it's the thing that it's different from PHP here is that like we can go and detect some fine-grained events happening on the client side, right? For example, imagine that we have a PHP script running on the server end, right? So can we go and detect that the user actually moved his mouse on the server side? Obviously, that is kind of impossible, right? How do we know that, okay, the user actually moved his mouse, okay, when we are running something on the server? So we know that server only knows things by some HTTP requests, right? So browser has to be sending all these HTTP requests to the server to notify the server about some event, right? But okay, the browsers, as we know, usually don't send any request to the server if the user goes and makes a move with the button with his mouse, right? So, but okay, how can we go and detect such moves, right? How can we go and do certain things based on these moves, right? So obviously, we can go and detect these kind of fine-grained events are happening on the client side using JavaScript, using client-side scripting code, right? And we can decide what to do when these events happen, because the server-side script is unable to detect these kind of events. And obviously, because it cannot detect these kind of events, it cannot react to these events as well, right? So this is kind of something that JavaScript offers us. Okay, there are also good things about server-side which are not supported by the client-side programming languages. The first thing is the security. Okay, the security means like you might go and keep all your data, all your private data on the server. You don't have to send it to the client side, and you don't have to make it visible to to the user. So user doesn't, if the user is as a programmer or as a tech savvy person, you can go and open your browser and then figure out what sort of data your front end application is processing, and then it can be it can reveal certain vulnerabilities of your code. So if you have something that you are doing, let's say a checking password or hashing password, right? Then you can do it on the server side, because you can be sure that the user won't have access to that source code. It won't see how you're hashing the password or where you're storing your password. All of that is actually happening on the server side. The client side is kind of considered to be less secure than the server side, right? So that's why all the security related stuff, related to the database, accessing databases or some accessing authenticated data, is mostly done on the server side. Another important thing is the compatibility, because we know that there are a lot of users and every user can use different browsers. Some users might prefer Safari, some prefer Mozilla, and some prefer Chrome, and even there could be guys who like Internet Explorer, right? So how to deal with all these different browsers who maintain different versions or different standards of ECMAScript or JavaScript, So how you can go and make an application which would work on all browsers. So that is kind of a big headache, for the client-side programming, but it is not a headache for server-side programming. Why? Because you just run your scripts, server-side scripts on a single computer, on a server, right? And you just need to tailor your script, okay, based on the configuration of that particular computer, right? So you don't have to worry about much about the compatibility when you're programming something on a server side, but you have to worry about a compatibility if you are writing a code for a client side right? And another important thing is the power, okay? The power means like your ability to modify the system resources. All your client-side script actually runs within the sandbox of the browser. It can never, ever, okay, leak outside the browser, which means that the browser actually executes your scripts and it restricts your web scripts from accessing the local resources of that computer. Okay, that is done again once again for making your security okay, paramount for the user, because obviously you don't want, let's say you access a particular page, you don't want that web page, okay, accessing your local resources. Okay, obviously that would be a critical, serious breach of a security. So the browsers usually restrict the client-side code, the JavaScript, from accessing your local system resources, which could be writing files, okay, reading files that are located on your computer, okay, or opening up some connections to different servers, okay, or even connecting to databases or some other socket connections, okay, or just basically managing your system resources, okay. So obviously those things are limited for client-side programming, but there is no limitation for those things on a server side. You can easily create files, you can easily read files, you can easily connect to databases, okay, or create other socket connections, okay, with a server-side programming language. So that is kind of core differences between okay, client-side and the server-side programming languages. Another important thing about JavaScript is that, okay, the JavaScript is easy language. It's a lightweight programming language. It can be used to make web pages interactive. That is the main main idea behind JavaScript, okay, making things more interactive on the client side, okay, or dynamically insert, okay, certain elements into your document, okay, being able to create or remove different elements from your web page and, okay, react to different events like your page loads or your user clicks and goes or moves the mouse or does something with your page. You would like to react to these events, so obviously you can use JavaScript for that. And some other things like calculations and all that stuff. Okay, so JavaScript is a web standard. Okay, JavaScript is a colloquial name for an official ECMAScript. Okay, it's called ECMAScript, and it has multiple different versions. Okay, and its standard is maintained by 3W Web Consortium and World Wide Web Consortium. Sorry. And most vendors like Chrome, or like Google and Mozilla, they actually they build their web browsers, okay, up to the standard, okay, that is adopted by this organization. It has nothing to do with the Java, okay, other than the syntax, as it doesn't use Java at all. Has nothing to do with that other than the name, okay, so just the name says JavaScript. It has nothing to do with Java, and it hasn't been developed by Java at all. Okay, if you compare it with Java, Java is a strongly typed language, it's a compiled language. JavaScript is a scripting language, and it is looser on the data types. Okay, it declares, you don't need to declare variables. Sometimes errors are also silent. JavaScript is a kind of a more function-oriented language, in the sense that the functions can be passed as an argument to other functions. So that makes functions as first-class citizens, okay, in the language, okay. So the function can be passed into another function as an object. So something like that. You can go and do these things in JavaScript easily, right? So there are certain similarities. Again, I leave these kind of similarities for you to review. There are differences as well, okay, between JavaScript and PHP. Like JavaScript is sometimes more object-oriented because you can go and call some methods with a dot, and PHP is now also more object oriented. So these kind of differences are not very, very sensitive. Okay, so how are you going to go and start a JavaScript? How are you going to go and link JavaScript into your file? For that, you have to go and use a script, okay? So, and then this is how you're going to create variables. Let me go and create one single file and do some, okay, examples here. One quick example. Okay, I got some, okay, a folder called index. Let me go and, okay, create a template document and then say hello world, something like that. And I can go and define a script here, right? So I can say script source, and I can say app.js, right? So I can go and close that, and yeah, you can go and pass the type as the text JavaScript. Just make the browser know the content of this particular script. Okay, text JavaScript, and that's it. So now what I need to do is I have to go and create another file, call it app.js, right? And this is the JavaScript. So what I can do is I can say alert, and I say hello world. It's just our hello world in JavaScript, right? So what happens is now when the browser loads this particular page, it starts parsing it, and as soon as it encounters this particular tag, it goes and issues another HTTP request to download the contents of this file. And then as soon as it goes and downloads it, because it's a script, it goes and executes its content. And after executing its content, it continues its way of reading the files, right? So that is how it should work, right? Let me go and open that particular page, index.html page. And now, okay, it's kind of blocking, I guess. Yeah, so yeah, because I think my browser kind of blocks all these alerts, okay, but it should work. So let me go and do something else then. Log hello world, and then I'll go and refresh the page, and I'm gonna go and inspect it. And if I refresh it, oops. Okay, so let me go and try again. I think I forgot to save it. So let me go and refresh that. Okay, now I have, okay, hello world. There's a pop-up coming out of that. And then, okay, once I press OK, I'm going to see this hello world thing. And if I go into the console here, I'll see this hello here, which has been printed by this console log. So now I can see that I can execute this JavaScript files inside my browser. Now browser goes and prints things into the console, and it shows me some message box, okay, here. So let's proceed to something more, interesting. Okay, so the rest of the JavaScript is pretty simple. The way how we go and define variables, very similar to what we do in other languages. For example, this way we can go and define a variable. As you know, it's a loosely typed language, so we don't have to go and specify the data type here. The var is a keyword for variable declaration and assignment could be done separately. So you can go and declare a variable and then assign some values into it. So this var actually declares a global variable, okay, something that can be accessed from anywhere, okay, in the function. So and then you can go and assign different values like strings and integers or floats, okay. So note that in JavaScript you have to go and put a semicolon, same way as you do in many other languages. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the language syntax. This is the comments. You can basically figure this out. You got some math function, math object, okay, which is embedded in the browser. You can go and use some math functions into it. These are logical operators. Okay, so you can go and do those things. It's if statements, booleans, for loops, while loops. Okay, so all of that is kind of similar to what you know already. So this is a precondition okay, loop. This is a post condition loop, so you can just know this is the way how you can go and pop up boxes. We already said alert. You can also do confirm or prompt. Okay, the confirm will show yes or no question. Okay, so it will return true if the user presses OK, and false if the user presses cancel. And prompt will return you the actual input that the user actually entered into this text box. Okay, so these are used arrays. You can go and define arrays. You can use array methods like push, unshift, and pop, shift, sort. Okay, all of these are similar to what we know in many other languages. Push will put an element to the to the element to the end push will add push will put the element to the end of the array. Okay, so unshift will put it to the first element. So pop will take the element from the end of the list, and shift will take it from the beginning of the list. Okay, so you can go and use this methods to do those things. Again, there's some string methods as well. You can go and work with these string methods. You can use split method, reverse method, join method, and so forth. So I'm not going to talk a lot about these things. Just go through these things and play with them yourself. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that here. Okay, so we talk about the event-driven programming. Okay, so what is an event-driven programming and how it's different from PHP, the one that we were considering in previous lectures. So in event-driven programming, okay, we don't have a code which is kind of linear. Okay, so we don't have a program where we go and write something linear, something that gets executed step by step, and then the task is complete, and then the program actually exits. So we don't have that kind of logic, right? In an event-driven programming, we have something else. We have events. Okay, so what is an event in its first place? Okay, there are a lot of different definitions for event, but the one that I really like is the most simplest one. So event in programming languages, especially in the one in event-driven programming, event is the availability of information. Okay, so you can go and define it like this. So you don't have particular information, but once that information becomes available, you would like to do something with that. Okay, and that basically describes what is an event-driven programming is. So you can go and write down small programs, small subroutines to process that information. Okay, so and then a collection of these small subroutines kind of defines your program, makes it your program as an event-driven program. Okay, when we're developing a UI-based programs, graphical user interface programs, we usually go and develop our programs in terms of events. Okay, why? Because we expect certain events happening. We expect the user going and clicking certain things or interacting with our software. And then, okay, what is that click actually is? It basically defines a certain intention of the user, right? So we can go in and find out, okay, now user has an intention, and this intention is a new information to our program. So we have to decide what to do when the user expresses his intention by going and clicking certain button, for example. So the user goes and clicks this button. So for a click of this button, we have a subroutine. This subroutine goes and runs a program, which does something, and then the result of that program is somehow displayed or shown to the user. So user gets some sort of a feedback right after that event. Okay, so the program that is executed when the user triggers the event is sometimes called an event handler. Okay, so this event handler is a program which is responsible for reacting to this event. Okay, so that is kind of an event-driven program, And JavaScript allows us to, JavaScript actually allows us to deal with these kind of events. So what sort of event we can go and write? Okay, so let me go and create a simple button here. So I can go and define some button, and then I can say on click, and I can say alert. Hey, you clicked me. Okay. Oops. Yeah. So I just need to this single quotes here, because it gets, and I have to go and close the quotes, and I can go and put even the semicolon here to indicate this one, and I can say click me. Okay, so I save it. Let me go and refresh the page that I have here. So I got this page. Let me go and put the, and it says, hey, you clicked me, right? So as soon as I go and click this button, let me go and get rid of all this stuff right now. I don't need it here anymore. Okay. Okay, so I can go and write down the entire JavaScript here, but I can go and say, I can call a function, okay, on button click, and I can call this function, and I can go and define a function here. I can say function on button click, right? And I can open a curly brace, and I can do something like that. So I can go and call that function, okay? Every time the user goes and clicks that button, it is going to execute. Let me go and refresh the page again. And every time I go and click something, it's kind of reacting to, my click, and it's showing me that message, right? So that is how I can go and, define functions, and I can go and assign a certain function into the button click. So we already saw that. Okay, but that's kind of nice, right? I can now go and do certain things on event or button clicks or on other events, okay? So there are a lot of different other events. For example, I can go and type in something into the input box, okay? So, and it's a type, and I can say on, so you can see on key down or on key up. So these are different events, okay? So I can go and, let's say, write console log. And this kind of gives me some event, right? So I can go and see every time I go and type in something to this text box, it goes and puts things into the console, right? So I can go and write down. Okay, the event is not defined. Okay, so this event is not valid here, but what I can do is I can say this value. So basically, we'll talk about what the meaning of this is. Okay, you might go and say, okay, that's an instance or something like that, but in JavaScript has a particular meaning for that particular keyword. So let's go and try this out now. And I will go and refresh the page. Oops, and then I'll go and, oops, I have this message here, and I can go and do this, and I can see that it's kind of consoling out. Every time I go and type in something, it's kind of printing out all that stuff here, right? So that's good. That's good. So now I can handle different kind of events. Like in this case, it's a key press event, and sometimes I can have other events. I'll just go and explain you these events, okay, as we go through the lecture. Okay, so what is more interesting about JavaScript other than processing events? Well, okay, remember about PHP and HTML, okay? Before we get into the JavaScript and the way how it interacts with HTML, let's go and remember about PHP and HTML, which is running on the back end. So what is HTML for the PHP? It is just a text, right? PHP doesn't give a damn about the structure of the HTML at all. All it does is basically generate some text, right? For JavaScript, it's absolutely different. It's completely different, okay? And an HTML for JavaScript is not a text. It is a data structure. It is a tree, okay? So, and this tree is in fact called document object model. It's DOM. So at the root of this tree, the HTML tag, and inside the HTML tag we have two child tags, okay, head and the body, and the head contains further tags and so forth. So every time the browser goes and parses your HTML, it also goes and builds a tree, okay? And this tree can be traversed. I can go and find any element in this tree. I can go and learn about everything about this element. I can go and learn about its content. I can go and learn about its style. I can go and learn about its other attributes, right? And I can go and not only learn about them, I can go also modify these things, okay? So I can go and, for example, change the background color of this H1. I can go and do different things, okay? As long as I go and find that particular element in the tree, right? So JavaScript actually allows me to go and find those things easily, okay? So every element of this tree is called an element object, okay? And you can see that it has a lot of different properties. So every property here corresponds to every attribute of the tag corresponds to the property of this element object. And I can go and change those things dynamically, right? But in order to go and find that element in this tree, I have to go and assign an ID to this element. So I can go and use document getElementById method to find that particular node in this tree, and then I can go and modify its element. So let me go and show you a very quick example here. For example, I have this H1, right? So let me go and put something, okay, H1, and then I go put some okay, ID here, and I can call it, okay, the title, or I can go and say LBL title, because it's just kind of label, right? And I can go and do this, and for this click of a button, I can go do something else other than alert. Now I can go and change the title of this element. So let me go and define a variable. Okay, I can define variables using var, and this variable becomes a global variable. But if I don't want this variable to be a global variable, I can go and use a different construct called let, and then I can say, okay, it becomes, now it respects the scoping rules. It respects, it's a new feature in JavaScript. It wasn't available until ECMAScript 6, but now after ECMAScript we got this let, and that means okay, it respects the scoping rules for these curly braces. Okay, so anything inside a curly brace becomes locked within that given scope, and outside this curly brace it won't be accessible. Okay, so let me go and define element, and I'm going to call it LBL title, and I can go and find that element using getElementById, and I can say LBL title. Now I got this element as an object. So what I can do is I can go and change its text, right? So how can I go and change its text? I can go and say inner text, and say hi, I got change it, for example, right? Something like that, right? So its inner text is now changed to something different. So let me go and test this out. So now I can go and do this. Now you see, if after clicking this button, the text of this element got changed, right? I can go and change many other things. For example, I know this guy has a style, but style is a kind of compound object. So I can go and access a particular property of this style. So for example, I would like to change the background color. Like I know in CSS, let me go and write this here. Style would be equal to background color, okay, and let's say, I don't know, gray, for example, right? I can go and write something else like that. So how would I write the same thing here? So in this case, I have to go and, because I cannot use dash here, otherwise the JavaScript will think that it's a minus. I have to go and change, okay, the notation to camel notation, from this kind of snaky notation. Okay, I have to go and write it like that, and it has to be equal to some string. In this case, it could be gray. Okay, so I can go and change the background color as well. Let me go and refresh the page again, and if I press click, now the background is gray as well. So note, I can go and modify the content and the background or anything for that particular element, right? I can do anything with that element. Isn't that great? It's great, right? I can go and modify things. Not only I can go and modify things, I can go and add things as well. I'm going to show you that one as well. I can go and add new elements. I can go and remove elements from my DOM, okay? So in fact, there are a lot of other objects as well in JavaScript, okay? The document represents your entire HTML document. The history represents your list of pages, okay, that you've been visited in this web page. Location represents the current location. You can go and traverse to a different location if you go and set something to that one, or instead you can go and use the window.open method to go and access a particular page. For example, if I would like to go to a different page, so I can go and use window. In fact, window is the global object, so I can go and define something like that. I can go and say location too, but usually people go and write it like that because the window, every script that you're writing here is a part of window. But you can go and like write it explicitly like that, and I can say HTTP, for example, google.com. So what it will do is it will change the current address to this particular URL. So I can go and do that now, and if I refresh the page and I press click, it goes and shows that Google here. I can go and use a different method. Okay, I can go and, instead of setting this location to this one, I can go and say open as well, and for example I can go and say blank, and I can go and close that option. What it will do is it will open a new tab with Google here, and this tab is not closed. Okay, a screen is information about the browser screen. You can go and learn about the dimensions of the browser. Okay, so let's go ahead with the document object. Okay, in the document object we have a bunch of methods like get element by ID, get element by name. You can select elements by their name or by their tag name as well, and we can go and call methods like open and write and so forth. So we can go and specify different IDs here. Okay, and yeah. So it's not given in the slide now, but I can go and use a different. Different function to select elements other than get element by ID. Okay, so for example, I can use our CSS selectors to go and get elements. Okay, so I can go and say query selector, and I can, the CSS selector, right? So I can go and say LBL title. So that is basically the same as saying get element by ID. Right? Because inside I can go and write any CSS selector, and you know that this hash key represents an ID in CSS selectors. So I can go and define that like this, and if I do this, it still works, right? So I can go and what if this element, it goes and gives me a lot of elements, okay? I mean, then it goes and returns me the first element. For example, if I go and say h1. Let me go and say other h1, hello world 2, and let me go and get rid of this ID because ID must be unique. So now I'm selecting by tag name, and I'm saying h1, right? So if I go and do this and then press click me, it goes and returns you the first selected element, the first element that satisfies that query. Okay, this one is not returned, right? So that is something that you need to bear in mind, okay, when you are selecting elements. But there is another method as well called query selector all, and this returns you all elements, and you can go and iterate through different elements, okay, by using this method. Again, this is just the way how you can go and select elements in that DOM tree, and you can modify their properties and so forth, right? So there's one more thing that there's one more thing that you need to know about JavaScript, is that JavaScript comes with the, it's a timer, and you can go and run certain scripts, you can go and run certain scripts, within a given time interval. So you can go and write it with a delay, or you can go and continuously, repeatedly run certain types of elements here, okay? So let's go and make a simple timer which is going to update every 1 second. Okay, how we can go and do that here? Okay, so first of all, there's one more thing that I'd like to do here. Okay, so I would like to go and create this timer as soon as my page actually loads. So I can go and say load. Okay, page load. So every time this body loads, meaning like it finishes its parsing and then it's ready to display things, I'd like to start my timer. Okay? So this is important because this script is getting executed, at this moment. Okay, whenever the browser comes into this point, it goes and starts, doing things here. But remember, the browser hasn't reached this body and it doesn't created this element yet. So if you go and say here at the beginning, if you go and say document get query selector, and then you say this thing, let me go and copy it here. If you do it something like that, that LBL title will be null. I mean, let me just illustrate you for example purposes. Let me go and say LBL, this one, okay, and let me go and leave it like that for a moment, and let me go and get rid of this thing for a moment just to illustrate you the case. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of selecting this LBL title, right, and I'm doing it right inside this app.js file. Okay, so what happens here is that the browser runs, it goes and finds that particular script, it goes and executes it, and at the moment that it executes it, it goes and asks the document, give me this particular element. But the browser doesn't know that this element actually exists because it hasn't actually created this element yet. It hasn't created yet, right? So how can it go and give you this element? So obviously it will give you null, right? And you can go and see that as an example here. Let me go and refresh it. Let me go and get rid of this hello world 2. So let me go and refresh that thing. And if you go into the console, you're going to see, oh, it's null, right? It's null. The JavaScript cannot give you all that stuff. So how can I go and get this particular element? One way of doing this thing is basically going and putting your script at the end of your body. That will work, right? Because when the browser hits this script, you know that it's already created this element. So this element is accessible. So let me go and refresh it again now. And now you can see that, okay, it can go and find that element and it's returning it in the console. Right? That's just the one way of doing things. There is another way, okay, I'd like to keep everything here. There's another way is, okay, I would like to go and assign on load, and I can say some method, page load, right? So I can go and do that, something like that, and I can go and define a function, call it page load, and I know this particular method is executed only when this particular HTML is fully loaded, it's fully rendered to the user. I can go and do it this way too. So let me go and refresh it now. And if I refresh it, indeed I can see this element, even if my script is here. This function is getting called only when the page is fully loaded. Now I can initiate my my timer. So I can go and say setInterval, right? And what should I do in my interval? So I can go and define a method called tick. So, and the tick is a method which updates. So let me go and say current time, or current seconds, and it's initially equal to 0. And I can go and say timer, and it's basically declared here. So what I can do is I can go and increment current seconds, right? And then find that particular tab, and I can go and say LBL title inner text. I can go and say inner HTML as well, current seconds. Or I can go and use this tilde notation just to make template strings. Okay, so I can go and do something like that. Current seconds, seconds elapsed. So remember the interpreted strings in PHP. You have similar thing in JavaScript. You have to go and use the backtick, and then you can place. Okay, it kind of makes your string concatenation easier. So you can go and write down. This is a placeholder for a variable. You can go and write the variable, and then you're simply updating this text with every tick. So now you have to go and run this tick. So first thing is you have to go and write a tick. Remember I told you JavaScript is a kind of functionally oriented language where you can go and, I mean, it is not a purely functional language, but it has the features of functional programming languages where you can go and pass functions into other functions as arguments. Note, this is a function, and I'm passing this function as an argument to another function, call it setInterval. And I can go and say, give the microseconds here, and this returns me the handle for this timer. So I can go and say, this is equal to timer, right? So, and this is, okay, I can go and stop that here. So I can go and say function stop timer, right? And I say timer is equal to null, I guess. That's the, yeah, it's not null, okay? There's a function called clear interval. I have to pass the timer ID here, sorry. So I have to say clear interval, and then I'll say timer. That's it. Okay, so I need to go and create a button to attach this method. So I can go and say, let me go and click here, and I can go and say stop timer, and I can again say stop. Okay, cool. So let's go and refresh the page and see if it starts ticking. And as you can see, it is ticking, it is running, and I press stop, it stops. It's not ticking anymore. So we can go and run that stuff like that here, right? Okay, good. So yeah, but there's something that you would like to run with some arguments. So how are you going to go and do those things, okay? So for example, you got a method called multiply. It takes two arguments, A and B. Right? So how are you going to go and like execute the method with these arguments, right? Remember, you're passing a function here, and you're not executing the function. So running something like that will not work, because here you're calling the function. You're not passing the function as an argument. Here you're passing the function, but here you're not passing the function. You're passing its result, okay, as an argument, because this calls the function and the result will be passed as an argument. So the multiply function can be passed into the setTimeInterval, okay, like that. But if it has two arguments, okay, then you can go and pass it right after specifying the timeout, okay. So whichever timeout you go and pass in here, okay, it's 2 seconds, it will be gone, and it will be executed after that timeout, right? In this case, it's a timeout, but it could be interval and so forth. Okay, that is kind of clear, I guess, right? So there are other many properties here, like the location object. You can go and call its reload method to cause the browser to reload that at a given path, or you can go and move from one path to another path and so forth. You can call the search methods as well, and so forth. Okay, you can go learn about the browser by the navigator method, and app name will be the name of the current browser. Okay, so you can go and learn about all these things. The cookie enabled feature, the platform. Okay, is it a Windows app? The user agent will be kind of the browser name, and so forth. Browser engine and the browser name and the browser language and all that different properties of the browser can be learned from that particular property. The screen object contains these properties which give you information about the dimensions of your screen. The history object has like important methods like back and forward. It is basically equivalent for clicking this particular button in the browser. Okay, so you remember this buttons back and forward. So these buttons can be simulated by calling the histories back and forward methods, and go is kind of goes to the current URL. So you can go and do that, and we already talked about how you can go and change this text properties. Yeah, and we talked about onload method and so forth, right? So the onload method, you can go and define it here. By the way, we said it here, but I can go and do it in a different way too. I can define an anonymous function, okay? So I can go and say something else like that. So I can go and say window onload is equal to, and I don't have to give the name of the function here. I can go and say function this. So that will work as well, because now I'm creating an anonymous function, and I'm assigning this anonymous function to this as an event handler to this particular method. So I can go and assign event handlers like that programmatically. I don't have to go and write them here inside the HTML. I can go and define those things here this way too. So if I go and refresh the page now, it will still work. See, it's working. It's still elapsing the seconds. Okay, great. So yeah, now we talk about this keyword. Okay, this keyword, you might guess, okay, this represents the current instance of that particular object. Right? This could be very, very confusing in JavaScript. Why? Because this refers to the caller of the object, not the actual instance of that particular. Because JavaScript is not an object, inherently not an object-oriented programming language, and the keyword this could is not necessarily the current instance that is of which the methods are being executed. Okay, this is more like a sender rather than the current instance. For example, if I go and so you remember we have a button click here, right? So if I go and say console log this, so which this would be this? Is it a window? Okay, I know that all of these methods are the Windows methods, because we remember that all of this app.js thing is kind of extending the window object, right? So like, look, we can go and call its location method, okay, location or everything. So we're in the context of a window class. So every time we go and define all these functions, we're kind of extending this window with new methods, right? So you might guess, as an object-oriented programmer, you might guess, okay, this refers to a window, because all of these methods are the methods of a window, right? So you might call it like that, right? But it is not window. It is, in fact, the caller of that particular, okay, method. So who is calling this method? This button. So it is this button. So let me go and demonstrate it to you again. So I'll go and refresh it, and I press click, and now you can see, okay, it's a window, right? It's a window. For what reason it is a window? Yeah, it is a window because I'm calling it inside a window, right? So yeah, this is a window. Yeah, it's getting called in the window, but let me show you the other way. Okay, so and I'll go and call it ID btn click me, and I come here and I'll say document query selector btn click me, and I'll say on click is equal to on button click. Yeah, I can hang this particular function to the click event of this object. Now this function will be this button. Let me go and show you that here. Okay, so let me refresh that again and press click, and now again it's not a window, it is the button, right? In the previous case it was a window because it's the window that is executing that method after clicking this button, right? So I'm actually calling this method. I'm not attaching this function as an event handler to this method. I'm in fact calling this method here, right? So it's not I'm attaching this method to this event. Here I'm explicitly doing this. I'm attaching this event handler to this method. Therefore, this is the caller. This is the actual object which called this event. Something that is quite like a little bit confusing at the first time, but when you look into this, you'll understand what actually this means. Okay, so yeah, by default, we know that all the code actually runs inside a window object, and all the global variables and functions are basically declared within this window, and this keyword actually refers to the current object, the one that is actually calling the method. Okay, so yeah, there is some example here of kind of fixing some redundant code when we are dealing with a particular event handler. In this case, we're dealing with the field set, and in this case we can simply alert this value every time the user goes and clicks, processes the input. Okay, we can go and find out which component actually called this method, and this one. Yeah, so there are certain kind of styles while doing the JavaScript programming. So, and one guideline for developing interactive client-side web application is keeping things separate. Okay, so we know that HTML is for content and the CSS for presentation, and JavaScript is for behavior. Okay, and we have to go and separate these three different concepts of our application in three different files. Okay, so if we go and embed JavaScript right inside the HTML, that makes our code less readable and less manageable at the same time. So we can go and assign, for example, the event handler, right inside the HTML like that, or we can go and do the same thing, inside JavaScript by assigning the function, to the onClick event. We already saw that as an example. Okay, good. So we talked about onload. We talked about this one. So the input validation, again, it's similar to what we do in backend input validation, but in the front end, we can do the same thing for the form. Okay, so every time when the form actually gets submitted, we can go and check using the regular expressions, right? So, for example, we can go and define the form by the certain ID, and then select that form by that ID, and the state is just an input inside that form, and then use, for example, every element has a value method, and then we can use this value actually returns a string, and then every string has a match method, and then we can go and pass a regular expression right into that. You can see these delimiters, right? It's not a string here, it's just a regular expression. It can be expressed in JavaScript in this way. So this means that any state value has to be a 2-character long string. Okay, it has to begin and end, as you can see, and it has to be case insensitive and it's global. So we can go and use the match method and pass a regular expression, okay, to that match method. So what it will do is it will go and use the string and then try to apply this regular expression to this string, and if it matches, then it returns true. If it doesn't match, then it returns false, and if there is a false, then we can go and stop the default behavior. So what is the default behavior for the form? We know that it basically sends the data to this particular URL, right? By default, it sends it via get, HTTP get method, but if we go and set the method to post, then it goes and sends all the URL encoded form data to this URL. That is the default behavior for form submission. So we can go and prevent that default behavior by simply calling this EF prevent default method. So you can see that this EF is event argument, and this onSubmit method kind of passes as an event argument, okay? And this event argument contains a prevent default method to stop the form being submitted, being sent to the server. So that's how we can do the validation on the client side, by just simply looking into the concrete control and then finding out its match, right? So that is kind of pretty straightforward, and if you know what is validation, it can basically do the same thing in the JavaScript as well. So every string has a match method, and match method takes a regular expression, and you can go and write an regular expression as we go here. Okay, so you can go and use the replace method, and you can go and use other methods with a regular expression. For example, regex replace contains some regular expression and contains a text that you would like to replace everywhere. There are other events other than click. We already saw the key down, key up, and key press events. Key down is every time this event gets fired. Every time I press the key, but do not release the key. And key up is triggered when the user releases the key. Key press is basically the combination of these two. If the user goes and presses the button, this event is triggered. The focus is every time I select an input control, this one will fire. Blur will fire every time I unselect. When the cursor leaves the control, the blur will trigger in the control. So there are other different event handlers, and you can go and learn about different event handlers from the key object. For example, you can go and learn about the key code that is being typed in the event object. So you can go and pass an event object to this particular event, and then the event object contains these properties. So let me go and show you that here. So remember, we have this input control here. So let me go and give an ID here, and I'll go and give an ID called txt, for example, name or something, some text, doesn't matter. And I can come back into my JavaScript here, and then I can go and say, let's say, let LBL text or name, let's say, and then I can say document query selector, and so I can say txt name. I think it's name, right? Txt name, right? Sorry. So it has to be txt name here as well, just to make it consistent. And I can go and assign an event handler to this particular element. So I can say on key press, right? And I can say, I can go and assign an anonymous function, and I can say, and this anonymous function takes an event object, and I can go and say console log event. So let's go and take a look into this. I can basically go and do the same thing for the window load. So let me go and do it here. So what I'm doing is after the load of this one, it basically goes and assigns that event handler to this object. Let me go and refresh that now. So, and I got a console here, and if I go and type in something, I'm getting any keyboard, okay, event, and you can see that it's basically showing me all the keys that I'm pressing here. It's a code and everything, and it's also saying, is it an alt key, is it a control key? So if I go and say Control A here, it's going to say, right, some keys are valid. So for example, yeah, so I can go and type in some, and certain helper keys could be found here, right? So I press shift, for example, I press return value. So I am going to basically find out if the helper keys are also pressed and so forth. So that thing could be used for doing certain hotkeys and certain actions. Okay. Let me press stop here.